Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this damnful idealistic crusade. I'm joined here by Mark Edlitz, who has an absolutely sensational book. It is another of his indispensable books that's not just about film history, but his particular area of expertise is digging into elements of film history that are really getting into the nitty gritty and solving a lot of long held mysteries. His new book is Maverick and the Machine, which is dealing with specifically the third Mercury film, Journey into Fear, which had an extraordinarily troubled production and post production, resulting in the 68-minute release version, which is always quite baffling when you see it for the first time, because even if you don't know about the history of the film, you can start to pick up on the odd sort of jumble that was the result of all of the post production. But I brought Mark Edlitz on to talk about his incredible book because it is an absolute treasure for Wells fans, fans of Journey into Fear, but also tries to answer a lot of the long held mysteries and misconceptions about the film, and is the perfect companion piece to Robert Carringer's books on Citizen Kane and the Magnificent Ambersons. So, welcome, Mark, and thanks for having this chat with me.
Well, I very thrilled to be here. I'm a frequent viewer of yours, so I'm thrilled to have a little chat with you right here. And I'm really happy to share the book with people because, as you said, one of the things that I love to do is just sort of dig down into the nitty gritty and try to solve long-standing film mysteries. This is, I think it's my seventh book. Maybe it's my eighth. I should have counted before coming on here. For those who don't know me, which is most of you, it's nice to meet you. My name is Mark Edlitz. I'm an author. I wrote 4 books on James Bond, including The Lost Adventures of James Bond, which goes into Timothy Dalton's unmade 3rd and 4th Bond films. And so, and I wrote a book called How to Be a Superhero, which was interviews with actors who played superheroes. And for that, I would find the Bob Holliday, who played Superman on Broadway. I would try to find people like that who are a little bit unsung or unheralded, as opposed to the people who always get the ink. So to speak. So and my last book was called Look Up in the Sky, the Forgotten Superboy series. And that was about the Superboy series from the late 80s, early 90s that lasted 4 seasons and then disappeared. And so my favorite things to write about and think about are areas of film, entertainment, media, journalism that are a little less covered. And Orson Welles's and Norman Foster's film Journey into Fear, as you were saying, the 3rd completed film for RKO, is one of those films. I mean, Orson Welles made, as everyone knows, Citizen Kane and Magnificent Ambersons for RKO, and those are considered 2 of the greatest films ever made. And his 3rd film that he produced, co-wrote, and let's talk about co-wrote, and co-starred is Journey into Fear. And that is less talked about. A lot of people don't know it. A lot of, Wells fans don't even like it. At least those that I hang out with or talk to. So I'm not suggesting that Journey into Fear is this unheralded masterpiece, but it is worth examining in terms of the truth of what was going on at RKO for Wells, his working methods. It's also a case study in studio era filmmaking, as well as what happened to this particular film. My origin, and by the way, stop me when I blather on. Just raise a flag or hit me with something?
Oh, you're fine. I'm not one to talk about that at all because that's what I
Well,
do.
you could do a good monologue for 40 minutes, impressively so. So when I first saw Journey into Fear, I think on TCM or maybe it was AMC, I missed the opening credits, and I just saw Orson Welles, and I saw the photography, his players, Joseph Cotton, Agnes Moorehead, Everett Sloan, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought, oh, this is an Orson Welles directed film. And this is obviously a little bit before the internet.
Yeah.
And so I was still learning about Orson Welles. And so I was like, oh, this Orson Welles directed it. And it was only later that I discovered that Norman Foster was the credited director of the film. And when people talk about this film, they broadly say, well, what's good about it is clearly Orson Welles, and what is bad about it is this Norman Foster guy, because who is he?
I grew up reading the same things because it took me forever to be able to actually see a version of the film, but that's what you always heard, and it's not true at all. Especially once I grew up and realized that a great deal of things that I loved and admired had actually been made by Norman Foster, and he had a particular style that it's in the film when you can actually figure out what's going on, because the re-editing and shuffling and everything it jumbles things up so much.
Yes, and we should talk about the editing. So the book traces the film from it being acquired at RKO by a studio reader to being assigned to a producer, to David Hempstead, who was enlisting Michelle Morgan, the French actress, and Ben Hecht, the screenwriter, to Orson Welles and Hempstead coming together, to Orson Welles taking over the project, to him co-writing it with Joseph Cotton. And it's funny, if you look at the credits of so there's two versions of the film. There is a cut that is released in America, and that's the one you frequently see on TCM. And then there's a cut that was released overseas, which has a different ending and different credits, and some different editing. But the one that I was familiar with says written by Joseph Cotton. It doesn't say Welles. It doesn't say Welles and Cotton who wrote it together. And so there was always even speculation about even that wasn't a known fact, because if you're writing a book and you look at a movie and it says Joseph Cotton wrote it by himself,
why would you question that? Yeah.
Why would you question that? And then when you just see this other version, it said this other international, what we'll call the international version for the purpose of this conversation, it says co-written by Welles and Cotton. So it's like, what happened there? And but it's good to know, it's important to know that for history, that it was co-written by the two of them, and that there were actually other writers who worked on the movie. Like with Welles's radio show, he had other writers sort of take the first crack at it. And even before he came on, there was a couple of other writers in addition to Ben Hecht who took a crack at it. And so when you read the book, you'll see that there's a bunch of other writers who were involved.
Plus, Norman Foster did uncredited stuff, and they were making up stuff during production and shooting as well.
Exactly. So Norman Foster, who co-wrote who wrote and co-wrote other movies, did some writing on Journey into Fear. It's important to remember that Welles hired Foster to work on It's All True, did such a good job, and said I'm calling you the co-director. He didn't have to do that. Welles didn't have to do that, but he believed in what Foster was doing and thought it was sufficient, that he wasn't just second unit director. He wasn't just some guy with the camera shooting.
He wasn't the hired hand.
he was an equal
Mhm.
in that case, and so it was in that spirit that Wells gave him the directing credit and entrusted him to do some writing and shoot the whole darn thing. Because I'm sorry, what were you going to say, Spencer?
Well, I was just going to say, I always, the more I look at it, the more it makes me think of what Wells was also doing in all departments of not necessarily choosing the big names, but elevating people whose work was really fantastic, or, casting the secretary in a walk-on role. It was the spirit of collaboration, and you didn't have to be the top name on the list or the head of the department. If your work was great, you were, you could, if you worked within the Mercury unit fine, you were treated as an equal. And Foster was far better than the B film director that he got credit for even at that point. And all you have to do is show somebody one of the Mr. Moto films. Those are incredible that he made and actually wrote most of them. And the fact that they can convey atmosphere and exotic foreign locales when they never left the back lot and they were made on these ridiculously short schedules, and they're the best action and adventure films probably in the classic studio era, and they were these little B films. So I mean, he had the chops for this type of material and knew how to make something that was more commercially minded without sacrificing quality, and that was really what they needed for the third film, especially after Kane and Ambersons. But RKO had other ideas.
Yeah, I think this film, I totally agree with what you just said. And this film, I think, is also indicative of the kinds of movies that Wells would have made had he continued on with RKO. Wells had a contract to make lots of films for RKO before he was kicked off the lot. And some of them were going to be high minded, like Kane and Ambersons, but some of them were just going to be, a thriller.
Yeah, Smiler with a knife versus Heart of Darkness with first person camera and all this stuff. It's like, well, one of these is going to be a lot more market friendly than the other.
and that reflected his taste and his he was curating a series of films for the studio. Like if you look at his radio work, you'll see a big difference from week to week in the kinds of material that he would do. Sometimes it would be Shakespeare, but sometimes it would be, it could be a thriller. It could, there was just a wide variety of it.
And they all had the stamp, though. That was what they had, the Mercury stamp. So they had the Mercury flavor, they had the Mercury players, they had Wellesian flourishes, but they didn't have to. They weren't all going to be highfalutin, and they weren't all going to be extremely lofty. But at the same time, they weren't going to be cheap and tawdry and be a waste of your time. You knew going in that you were getting something worthwhile, and you still feel that in the final release version of Journey into Fear. Like you can tell it's a Mercury production that's struggling to get out of the form it was released in.
Do you want to briefly say the plot or describe Journey into Fear for anyone who might not be familiar?
I don't want to go into too much for those who haven't seen it before, but it's generally described as being very Hitchcock in spirit, and that was really what they were going for, something in the vein of the 39 Steps, but a bit more timely to the point of just before as World War II had just gotten underway with the American involvement. But of course, it was based on the Eric Ambler novel, which had just recently come out that they had gotten the rights to, and Ambler was one of the great thriller writers of that time period. But it is about an American who works for a munitions company, if I'm remembering correctly. He is overseas and is having to return to the States, but various forces, specifically the Germans in town, don't want him to get back to America because they want to sabotage the other side's efforts however possible. So they have various agents out after him, and the Turkish secret police determined that the best means of getting him out of town safely is to just throw him on a cargo freighter with a whole bunch of quirky other passengers, and it becomes quickly apparent that things are not what they seem, and some of the passengers, maybe even more than one of them, might also be out to kill our hero, who is a very reluctant hero at best.
Yeah, you said so much that I kind of want to respond to. The one thing I will say off the top of my head is you said reluctant hero at best, which is a great way to describe Joseph Cotton's Howard Graham, is that he is very much an ordinary man in an extraordinary situation. But unlike John McClane in Die Hard, he never really rises to the, you don't really see an arc of like, now I'm a hero. And that was important to Norman Foster, and that was important to Orson Welles in keeping Joseph Cotton sort of back-footed. And there was going to give him moments where he would be a little bit more brave, but he was never going to be the superhero of this story.
I always liken it to when I'm trying to describe the movie to people who have never seen it. I liken it to what if Roger Thornhill in the first reel of North by Northwest, where he's all like, like, you've made a terrible mistake. What if he stayed like that for the whole movie? What if he was just like, I can't be bothered, I've got theater tickets this evening? Like, what if it was that for the whole storyline until, like a little bit of breaking here and there as he's getting more and more fearful. He looks over his shoulder a bit more. He realizes that, oh crap, there's more people probably here to kill me now. And then by the end, he kind of snaps a little bit, but it's pretty much that through the whole feature.
Well said. Yes. Yeah. And the studio didn't like that. And more to the point, the test audiences did not like that.
No.
And they did not. One of the things I was able to track down is the test audience's reaction. And if you thought there's a wide variety of reactions to Ambersons, including very laudatory reactions. These, I would say, while there was praise, some of them skewed towards rejecting what was considered artsy, even just the lighting. They thought it was too dark and muddy. Some of the audience members rejected that Cotton wasn't heroic. Yeah.
They didn't like it because it was a little bit different.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. That becomes apparent. And that's, of course, before all of the, gosh, I don't know how many versions technically it existed in terms of the,
yeah.
That was one of the absolute highlights of your book, of actually getting the timeline of events and seeing how it morphed into one thing and another, and what would have normally been done in a post-production process kept getting interrupted. And then, of course, Wells working on Ambersons, and then working on Journey into Fear, and then having to go to Brazil for It's All True, and then having to cable back and forth, and the communication lines not being the greatest, and the studio becoming ever more so frustrated, but also just not wanting to bother with any of this. It's very much a post-production process that didn't get to be naturally completed in the way that it would have been had they just been left alone, like any other film on the RKO slate at that time.
Yes. One of the things I said was that this is a forensic account of the making of the film. And I tell that story in the book in different ways, including sort of the narrative of the making of it. And then towards the end, I have an appendix where it's the day by day shooting schedule, and all from studio records. Let me talk briefly before I get to my other point, just in terms of the research process of the Wells's archive is available publicly at many different libraries and institutions. And you mentioned Carringer earlier, who as people will know, wrote a book on Citizen Kane and one on Ambersons. The one on Ambersons is a great document on the making of the movie, even if there's elements of that book which are completely wrong-headed in their conclusions. There's a chapter in it called, Oedipus and some, which
Yeah.
says that Wells had a fear of completion. And so there's a lot of that book which is just sort of wrong-minded, and propagated ideas about Wells that are still held true to this day. So if you take away that part of Carringer's writing, I was trying to be, in some ways, the third book, the one he didn't write, take that approach that he used for Ambersons and apply it to Journey into Fear. And so it's just like, when you go in your document, you hit find. And so my approach with this, instead of find Magnificent Ambersons on the documents, sort of metaphorically, is find Journey into Fear on the documents.
Yeah.
It's just that nobody had bothered to look at this film for a lot of reasons. And then towards the back, I think I call it the many journeys or something silly like that, where there's an appendix which just shows you the different versions of the film, because there's more than just two. We always say that
more than two endings.
Yes. We say there's the domestic American release and the international release, but the film went through multiple iterations, and I sort of added that, and I used that, and so in the appendix I ripped that off of the narrative that sustains the book and just put it in the appendix, and I got that approach from Jonathan Rosenbaum's book Discovering Orson Welles, because he has an appendix where it's like where he takes away all his findings and said, well, this is the current state of Welles' work. So I thought, oh, that might be useful for somebody.
Yeah, that and nailing down certain elements of the timeline, but also how the versions got completed and finished. Because I knew certain parts of things, but I only knew so much because no one's ever gone into this film in this level of detail or gotten materials together. And you ask people about Journey into Fear, and you're lucky if they've even seen it. Two, you're even luckier if they've seen the alternate version that was shown in Europe, and only, as far as I know, has 2 physical media releases, neither of them great, and one I found by accident, which is the Japanese Laserdisc with hard-coded subtitles you see behind me. I stuck that on one night because I was watching the American cut. This is long before the Blu-ray existed, and the image LD of the American cut, my copy, has disc rot on it. So I'm like, well, I found this Japanese one. Well, I could just switch over to that and finish the movie. And all of a sudden, the cut is different. I'm like, what? Okay, it's a different print source. It's got hard-coded Japanese subtitles, but wait a minute. And I had heard, rumblings and seen some references and things. And then I went back to the beginning and saw, okay, yes, this has the different opening credits, has the different ending. And then eventually this version turned up on it got rediscovered, and it's been shown at some film festivals, but I think they just showed the standard definition file. And the only release of it I know outside of this is a Spanish PAL DVD from Region 2. So it's got the speed up, and that was years and years ago. So the secondary version truly needs real preservation efforts, but it also needs to be properly labeled, because you did a fantastic job in actually identifying what this version is, and not only how it came to be, but how it got released and the whys. And the whys made perfect sense, because I always figured it was some sort of earlier version, or somebody tried a different edit, and for whatever reason it got leaked out, or it was used for the foreign export versions. And that's sort of what you were able to clarify, but you went way beyond that.
Yeah, that was one of the mysteries of why did RKO, who spent so much time and money re-editing it, why would they allow deliberately allow, or was it a mistake, allow these other prints to get into it? So I get into the nitty gritty of that, and I think solve that mystery. And the cut that you were referring to, I think that was discovered by Roger Ryan, uh, maybe at Munich.
I think so.
I never really trust the things that I say, with it's out loud. I want to sort of check the book to make sure
Yeah.
I'm saying it right. But and so I didn't know about that either until I started, researching the film, because it's not a given that people don't know about this film. So it's certainly not a given that they know that there's two different cuts and there's two different endings and different credits, and so this whole when I started researching this book, it wasn't available on your Blu-ray behind you. You could only watch it sort of legally on TCM.
Yeah, because it was one of those. It's one of the RKO films that fell into a sort of. It wasn't a moratorium. It was just that it was too obscure for its own good. That was the problem. So if you dug around, the only official releases were the Image Laserdisc, which again, my copy has disc rot, so you had to find one without it. And then it got a very, very limited run on VHS under the RKO Classics banner with the black and white and gold cover. So if you search for them on eBay, you can find those. And then before that, it had some very early VHS releases in the 80s. And that was like at the start of RKO trying to market tapes. And some of those were, I mean, they kind of look more like early public domain gray label releases, but that was it. That it had like VHS and beta one time in the 80s. Then it had the official master on LD and VHS one time. I think they only did one print run because the LD is not common and the VHS is like non-existent. I've just seen images on eBay. And then that master would get shown on TCM. That was it. That was literally all you had.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, it's weird. I want to say that for decades,
Yeah,
you couldn't watch it unless you were,
unless you knew what to look for.
Unless you well said. Unless you knew what to look for. I used to always keep my DVR, when they had DVRs, set to record Journey into Fear every time it came on, and I would always just watch. And so my DVR was filled up with little Journey into Fears, just because that was the only way to without being as inventive as you are, to get a hold of it.
Oh, that was me with a VCR back in the day, being the kid trying to figure out how to make the VCR programming work, and then thinking you got it because there was an obscure rare film on TCM at 3 a.m. on a school night, of course. And then the next day you rush home, you're like, oh, this is great. You put it in, and of course the recording didn't work. And you're like, no. So yeah, I still remember those days.
Yes, I remember. I was recording The Spy Who Loved Me while watching it with my dad, and there were two different speeds which you could record something, and I did the higher quality, but it took up more tape than The Spy Who Loved Me, and so I stopped it midway and literally wept. I was young, but I was in like high school. Excuse me, elementary school. I was in elementary school. And so my dad was like, you could tape over my football game if you like.
I had that exact same experience. I had to start using my parents' tapes, and I wish I had done more now because I miss all of the TBS 15 Days of 007 bumpers so much.
Yeah,
I still have a couple of those tapes, but not as many as I used to have. But yeah, I think the film being so obscure,
yes,
not because of anything other than just, well, they did one release back in like 1989, 1990, 91, and then that was it. And then it just stayed in that sort of weird land. But at least it did get a physical release, because there's still a ton of RKO films that didn't get any. But it never got that sort of rediscovery, or better yet, it never had somebody at Warner Brothers suddenly go, oh, hey, I know how to market this during the DVD boom, because it really didn't make sense that they didn't do it alongside Kane. But then again, they didn't release Ambersons until they put out Citizen Kane on Blu-ray. And when they did, they just put out a standard definition DVD like it was a deluxe package. And it's like, what? Why did
No,
you do that?
it's an important point because market forces dictate what is film canon and what is not. Because if you can't watch something, you can't talk about it, you can't write about it. So if something like Journey into Fear, which is not available, it can't be part of the Wells discussion.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, the other thing that people say about Journey into Fear was that it's a cheap film. You know, it's
yeah,
not.
I never understood that.
Wells had Wells was given a budget, and RKO said, we're going to give you this much money and you could spend as much or as little as you like on either film, but that's the budget of these two films together. And so it wasn't, they didn't treat RKO nor Wells considered this to be like a cheapy film. We're just going to throw it away.
It wasn't a B film.
It wasn't a B film. No.
But the studio eventually packaged it and wanted it to be done and over with, so they packaged it and acted like it was a B film.
Exactly so. And that was in part, you know, there were also external factors at play in terms of World War II and just resources that impacted some of the decisions of what was preserved of the film, both in terms of its elements, but also in terms of what sort of compromised version that they were going to release.
I'm so glad you highlighted all those, because people today, I think especially, don't realize that, you know, even new productions during the war years, they had to allocate every bit of lumber even for building sets. There were so many limitations just for rationing, for one thing, but then you also had to ration out how much film you were using because of the silver nitrate content, and then all these other factors came into play even in editing and post-production of films. So when you had a film that had lots of people going back and forth and tweaking things and trying to appease the studio, and then there was even trouble and back and forth about, okay, can we send all this film material to Wells in Brazil to look at while he's working on this other thing that we don't really care about, but we can't admit that we don't care about? And so, which is the short story of It's All True. But yeah, what you did that was really important, I think, was to detail all of the wartime restrictions that then made everybody at the studio and all the different departments more leery of doing certain things, because they had to worry about allocation for every film and how much money they were spending. And then there were the changeovers in studio leadership. And then you had George Schaefer getting constant additional pressure because it was now after Kane, and people within the studio were getting basically fed up with the whole Mercury unit. Basically, they were being seen as sort of the problem unit, because they, for lack of a better term, they couldn't just make something normal and not cause problems, which wasn't true, but it's part of the Wells mythology. It's like, no matter what he did, no matter how hard he tried, stuff, people would make up their own minds about stuff, and that mythology would get stuck to him. And another thing I wanted to mention that I found so striking in your book, because I knew some of this must have happened, but you detail all of the minutia of what the correspondence was and how everybody tried to address concerns after the first preview version, which ran about 100 minutes. And they didn't just say, oh, well, give us a ton of money, we're just going to reshoot a ton of stuff and we want to do it our way, we're not going to listen to you. Instead they did what anybody in that situation should do. Listen to everybody's concerns, try to figure out, okay, how can we make this better? How can we polish this? And also do some of the stuff we wanted to do in terms of tweaking certain things. Nobody can still agree on the ending. Maybe we can use this. What have we already shot? And eventually getting to the point of Wells just, making as many suggestions as he could, even to the point of saying, oh, well, we can try this, we'll pay for it ourselves. We'll use a corner over here. We won't build an entire set. We can do this. And then we need this one reaction shot, and we'll bring in Joseph Cotton and he'll do it without pay. And, they tried so much, and Wells especially tried And even in the final act of all of this, he made suggestions to deal with the studio edited version to try and make it better, because even that wasn't quite working with test audiences. Is like, and so that's not the sign of somebody who has to have their own way or has a fear of completion. And really striking is that it sounds incredibly familiar if you know anything about Wells, because this, I mean, it basically sounds like Touch of Evil 15 years ahead of time. There's no 58-page memo, but it's basically the same. Please don't destroy our movie. Here's some suggestions. And like Touch of Evil, the studio eventually goes, no, well, yeah, I guess we can do some of that, but the rest, no. And then they dump it out on double bills, and then like, yeah, it's a write-off. Yeah, that Wells guy, yeah, we don't want him anymore.
No, I mean, you made a lot of really important points. And sort of the umbrella of those points is that Wells was not trying to take his toys and go home. He was saying, if you want to play, here are these action figures, and I was going to play war, but you want to do a romance, or making whatever. I'll play your game. I'll go. You got this idea of how you wanted to make it work. Sounds good. Let's try that. Let me address your notes. Give me an opportunity to address your notes. One thing I do want to say is that RKO, there were definitely hostile forces at RKO towards Wells. He was definitely kicked off the lot. People, someone at RKO was laughing that they went into an empty a theater that was not full sales for Journey into Fear, and thought that was hysterical. They got a report on that. They thought that was funny. So there were definitely hostile forces at RKO. However, there were also people at RKO who did support Wells and who did wish him well and who did want the films to succeed and who try to have his back. They did try to initially give him as many resources as possible. And so I think that's also important to mention, that it wasn't always mean RKO versus, genius Orson Welles. There were times when they were trying to meet him towards the middle.
Yeah, there was always some bit of trying to meet somebody halfway. I've always gotten the impression, and this kind of prefigures the person who came in after Wells left and was actually working along a lot of the similar lines, but was also having to do it at a much lower level of production scrutiny and cost. But I always felt that Wells had a particular style that in some ways kind of rubbed people the wrong way, but also because he was so driven and energetic and determined to do things that were a bit different, like Journey into Fear being purposely designed to be a little bit quirky, to have these quirky characters and this undercurrent of humor that was a bit on the edge. This quality of wanting to break the mold to a certain degree, but not lose sight of what the actual production and product was supposed to be. I think that just rubbed people the wrong way, and so that's why I think you've got the interesting shift, because after Wells has gone from RKO, and then they even had the slogan "showmanship in place of genius," and it's like, well, how much more publicly insulting can you get? In a lot of ways, Val Lewton coming in,
exactly.
He actually had a lot of the same problems, but because he had worked for so long as Selznick's right-hand man, he knew the ins and outs of the industry. And so he knew when to sort of, okay, I have to back off here. I'm dealing with a moron. Okay, now if I go over here, and then if I have to talk to this person, or if I just rewrite the script myself and don't put my name on it because I'm actually the producer, and I pour my blood, sweat, and tears into making this little 72-minute film where they stuck me with a title and, like a budget of used chewing gum to make 2 movies for one, okay, I can make this as good as I possibly can. But he had that extra mentality of knowing how the system worked, where Wells didn't, coming in from the outside and having all of that public scrutiny, and then having Kane and Ambersons and all that just stacked up. And I think Journey into Fear, even though it wasn't really thought about much, that basically became the final nail in the coffin in RKO. Basically, what I'm saying is one of my all-time great cinematic what if alternate universe dreams that, my God, why didn't it happen? Why couldn't they have just put Wells and Val Lewton together? That's one of my all-time, what would that have been like? What if Mercury had stayed on at RKO, and okay, yeah, what if they hit them with extreme budget limitations, but they had somebody in there who knew how to get the most out of everything and to also deal with the front office, because with Luton, Charles Kerner was basically his champion, and Kerner was not the biggest fan of Wells, and that's always kind of struck me as odd, because Kerner seems like somebody who had a level head on his shoulders and was supportive of Luton, but I guess Wells was just too Orson for him.
Yes, I mean, I agree with you about Val Lewton. He was someone who succeeded very well at RKO, and in part because, as you said, his budgets were considerably lower, and so the Val Lewton unit, they would just you make these films, they do well, just keep on. They're probably not the films that RKO would have ordered up, because Val Lewton is also unconventional. But because he made them, and at a lower budget, there was less scrutiny. And but I love Val Lewton. I think he's great, and he what did he, 8 or 9 films or whatever at RKO, and that's sort of what I mourn, is that we didn't get those 8 or 9 Wells films.
Yeah, the Luton unit basically became what the Mercury unit was going to be. Films of incredible quality. They didn't have to have the biggest budget in the world, but they had that absolute stamp. And then even outside of the 9 horror films, he had to fight tooth and nail. And what does he go and do? He wants to make a costume drama. And they're like, all right, fine, you can make it, but you got, we're going to give you $10 for something that should cost $100. And he's like, you want me to make this for $0? So what does he do? He goes and makes.
Right. Sure. Using some of the Wells filmmaker, the Wells crew worked on Luton, Robert Wise, Mark
Robson. Yeah. And the first time I saw the ghost ship, I kept wondering, I kept looking at the sets. I'm like, okay, is this some of the Journey into Fear set? Just brilliantly, because they had to reuse all the sets, and that's what Mercury did sometimes, using scraps and bits and pieces. But yeah, the first time I got to see the ghost ship, I kept wondering, I'm like, is there some of the Journey into Fear set in this? Like, is it just redressed?
As you were saying, Wells was thinking about, I could do a pickup shot using, the corner of that wall, or the hotel for or for Ambersons, or whatever. He would find a way to work. But they did build, the exterior of the ship. They had a lower. They had to. They weren't happy with how it looked in terms of sort of going under the water, so they had to fix that. They changed the width of the ledge, to make it, if the climax. I won't get into too much of the climax, but the climax takes place on a ledge, and if your character is standing on a ledge that's 5 feet wide, there's less danger than if it's on a ledge that's 1 foot wide. So when they first saw that how the technicians made the ledge, they said, "Oh no, that's not going to work. So let's spend the money and redo it." And there's some great thing. I want to quickly say that the opening sequence with the killer Jack Moss, it is a great, exciting bit of cinema.
And that's jaw dropping. The first time you see it, I mean, nobody did pre-title sequences then. It's just, it's just a little tag, but it is so striking and has those ominous notes, but you get the first tinge of humor because you get the first introduction of the signature of the killer, which is the record with the skip in it. And it starts going, and in the audience, the first time you're kind of like, oh, wait, is the film messed up? Is that supposed to be skipping? And then you're like, is he ever going to fix it? And that actually gets you more into the scene, and it's so incredibly real feeling. And then you go right smack into the title, so it's got this really, it grabs you at the start, and you don't expect that. Even compared to the openings of Kane and Ambersons, all three of the Mercury films, they have unique, striking openings.
Yeah, I don't get into this in the book, but when there's a scene in The Untouchables with Sean Connery doing a gramophone, which is also shot, some of it I think from the outside, and I always wondered if De Palma was inspired by, who is a Wells fan. I always wondered if De Palma was inspired in part because of the opening of Journey to the Theater.
It might be, because it's very stark in its composition, which also clues you into, yeah, we're back in Mercury land, because there are moments throughout, and this is where I think the whole the good stuff is Wells, or Wells ghost directed it, because there are visual signature moments and compositions where it makes it look like, oh, this is Citizen Kane Goes to Thrillerland, and Jed Leland is just really grumpy today, and people are trying to kill him. And they're jaw-dropping moments throughout that then get mixed in with things that are a bit more standard in the composition, or if you're an editor, or anything about the history of the film, you can start to pick out moments where, like, okay, well, this is probably a reshoot, and then especially if you start noticing the edits, and then the imposition of the narration.
That's an important point, and we won't go too far into it, but you'll see jump cuts if you're watching closely, and I call out some of them in the book. You'll see jump cuts in scenes where single takes are they just like cut here and cut here, and then we're gonna get rid of this bit, and it's going to be a jump cut, but just a weird little short one, and that happens multiple times, because their goal was just to get this down. RKO's goal, not Wells and Foster's goal, was to get it down as short as possible. And in doing so, they got rid of a lot of the internal logic of the film. They got rid of some of they lost the clarity of relationships of who is Dolores Del Rio? What is her relationship? Is she married? Is the guy that's with her? Is he just his dance partner? Or what's the deal with that?
Yeah,
which is critical. And then they also got rid of the entire infidelity angle between Joseph Cotton and Dolores Del Rio, and even Ruth Warwick, who plays Cotton's wife, and Wells as Hockey.
Anything that was even the slightest bit risque, or also anything that was a little bit out there, a little bit different, a little bit quirky, including a lot of the little bits with the quirky characters on the ship. Anything they could hack down that was a bit out there, that the test audiences were not fans of. And then I love how you confirmed that they actually had Joseph Cotton redub a lot of his dialogue to alter the quality of the performance, to make him a little bit more straight-laced, to make him a little bit more, give him a little bit more gumption, so he didn't play it, like I said, more like Roger Thornhill for the whole movie.
Right. You could see Joseph Cotton, his original take was more frightened. And they said, just redo it. Just don't be frightened. Just redo the line.
Yeah. And sometimes if you look closely, you can start to tell the dubbing doesn't quite match.
Yeah.
And you can clearly tell, like, the tone of the original line reading that you're looking at isn't matching the tone of the redub. And so, especially if you know about editing, I would love, and no school's ever going to let me do this, but I would use this film and just teaching editing, just as a case study, just to be like, okay, I'm going to show you this movie. It's 68 minutes long. Okay, now you've seen Journey into Fear. Tell me how the plot goes, because the first time you see this film, it's quite baffling. It's like I tell people it's like you get on this roller coaster ride and then it stops for a bit, and you get acclimatized to your surroundings, and suddenly you realize, oh, okay, this is where we're going with the story. Okay, wow, this is some really great atmosphere. And then, oh no, we're going again. Oh no, because it's got this jumbled quality, but it does have an incredibly fast rhythm to it, because it's only 68 minutes long. But then you have to tell people, well, this originally was a 100-minute movie. They might have tweaked a few things, and they still wanted to address the ending and maybe go with a different option. But it was conceived and made at about 100 minutes long, and what you have here is 68 minutes long. There's a bit of a discrepancy there. And it wasn't just they removed scenes. They took little pieces out here and there, and then they prematurely end some scenes with a fade, and then they instituted Cotton doing voiceover narration that has to take the place and do all this exposition of stuff that is no longer in the movie, but the narration is limited. So the first time you see this, I don't fault anybody for coming away confused or saying or feeling they don't like the movie, or that it wasn't that good, or it's like a weird little RDB movie. I don't fault people for that, because the release version, it is bewildering. You have to look at it. You have to watch it multiple times to actually figure out exactly what's going on. But it's a fascinating case study if you really want to look closely at it, because it's more chopped up than Touch of Evil ever was, and even the soundtrack is that way.
Yeah, and I know we're winding down, but let me quickly just get out a few points before I forget them. And we don't, not to necessarily get into, but just to like throw out. We've talked about two endings, and it's been speculated that those were only the two endings that were shot, the original and one other. But I've uncovered evidence that there was actually another. Not only were there multiple endings written and discussed, but there was another ending shot and screened that does not survive. I also want to say that before I started writing the book, I was taking the two films together, the international and the domestic, and I was trying to combine them. I was trying to make an Uber cut of them.
Yeah.
But the book explains why you can't do that. Those two films, while are in some ways are at odds with each other, and some of the choices that were made or were shot were a reaction. So it's not that there's all this footage that if you just fold it together, we'll get the complete Journey into Fear. That's not the case.
I've tried things like that myself, and that's a point. I that's what I eventually realized too, because the two versions are completely different in picture and sound. You can technically take some of the footage that's unique to the European version and place it in the American release version. That'll at least get you some of the material put back that should have never been removed in the first place. But it doesn't solve anything else, and then you have to play around with trying to make it match, because they messed around with the soundtrack and then they put the narration on, and so you can make a composite cut. And I know some fans have made attempts at it, which are incredible. Yeah. And Mr. Arkadin is the same way, and Touch of Evil is its own particular thing. And at least there they were able to do the 1998 reconstruction based on the memo, and they had enough materials to be able to do that. Well, with Journey into Fear, all we really have is the new 4K scan of the American release version, and then the old standard def masters of the alternate European release version. And I don't know what else might exist in the vaults. We just don't have access to that material, if there is anything.
My impression is that my impression is that it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
I won't get into it now, but the book also covers what happened with Journey into Fear with Magnificent Ambersons footage. So but what was I going to say? Oh, but I do love, as an academic exercise, if anyone wants to combine them, I'm not saying I'm against it. I love these. I love these academic exercises where people do that. I think
It's
they're
a
terribly fun.
phenomenal learning
Yeah.
experience. Yeah.
The gentleman at Munich who does that does a fantastic job, and I love the confident, the Arcadian version of that. So
Yeah, the only thing I could figure is you would have to do, because I'm like you, I'm pretty sure it was eventually destroyed along with the
yeah,
Ambersons material, because RKO kind of lumped them together and they held on to stuff for a while and then that was it. But you'd have to do something along the lines of what people have tried before with Ambersons, or what was done with Lost Horizon for a long while, when all they had were stills and they had partial soundtrack. And so they had to mix and match and use stills, or you'd have to, if you could get the original shooting script of Journey into Fear, use, that as your base, and then literally include images and try to get actors to just do close enough approximations of the different characters, and place that in, and expressly say this is a reconstruction attempt of the shooting script,
right.
and that's literally all you can do.
And I should clarify my comment is that they did do that. They I think it was even screened at the Museum of Modern Art in New York a few years ago. Which I unfortunately didn't get to see, but so yeah,
I've heard of that, but of course you read about things like that, and then it's like it was a one-off, and then it's like, can we actually get that out somewhere, because we're all dying to see it, all of us crazy Wells fans, like the five of us who actually are obsessed with this strange movie.
Well, the one of the final things I'll say is that you don't have to like Journey into Fear to read this book. You don't have to be familiar with Journey into Fear. I mean, you should take a look at it, but
Yeah.
It's not designed. It's not intended to be the making of the movie for uber Journey into Fear fans. The book is meant to explore Wells's working methods. It's meant to expose what it was like to make a studio film at that period of time. It's meant to dispel myths about Wells that still are true today, and it's meant to dispel them based on the facts that I've discovered.
That's the key of your book, that it's not just the journey of Journey into Fear, but it's getting into the details in the order in which they happen, so you can actually understand how we got from what began as, okay, this is the third Mercury film. They know they want to do something a bit more commercially minded. They want to make an out and out thriller. And then how it eventually came out and was released as the 68-minute jumbled, reshot, re-reshot, re-edited, remixed, rescored, reshot, re-edited, edited again, and with some partial Wells changes, but then, hey, we got this other version we made, and some of them already went to Europe. That'll be fine. That whole, you start pulling the thread, and it starts to unravel, and you follow that, and your book does such an incredible job of giving somebody that whole experience. So somebody can pick up this book and read it who just wants to know about film production in the 1940s and RKO, and about Wells and the Mercury unit. Somebody can pick this book up, read it, and get an incredible education, and have never actually seen the film. It is so incredibly well put together, and you really were able to get it to that state where it feels like the third companion volume to the two Carringer books that we've had on our shelf for so long. This book has always needed to exist, and it finally does. So I absolutely devoured this. I cannot thank you enough for putting this together.
Let me just show quickly. There's two versions of the book. The band is I don't have just says advanced, not for advanced copy. I don't have the real ones yet. It's the same book, but it just doesn't have this. So it's come in paperback, and then and in a hardcover as well, depending on your reading tastes. So
Yeah,
wanted to share that as well.
yeah. Well, anyone who has watched us chat about Journey into Fear, will already be wanting to dive into this book. But I have to say, this is not just a film book that I give my highest recommendation and say everybody should go and read it. I think this is the most important book of Wells scholarship that has existed in years. It's a book that always needed to exist. This is a story that always needed to be told, and hopefully this makes people more aware that there actually was a third Mercury film. And no, Orson Welles didn't direct it, but it's got his stamp all over it because it was supposed to, and it was a very good film, but we will never get to see that. And it's just as screwed up as Ambersons was, but in a different way, and it had a different journey, and it formed the last stage of the Mercury unit at RKO. And it shouldn't just be a footnote to history, and get one tiny mention in every book about Kane and Ambersons, or if it even gets a mention at all, and in the footnotes at the back, like, oh yeah, there was this other movie, yeah, we think Wells directed it, and this other guy got credited, and it's only 68 minutes. It's like a weird little B movie, because it's so much more than that. And you can see, watching the film, you can see the greatness in it. You can see the flashes. You can, and the closer you pay attention, you can start to feel the other hands in there that are just grabbing and tearing apart, and oh, put this scene here, and oh, put this here, and oh, do this, and oh, do that. That's not important. No, that's the censors aren't going to like that. Yeah, just take that out. Oh, it doesn't matter if the story doesn't make sense. Yeah, it'll be fine. So it's a very, very convoluted story. It's a tale that always needed to be told, and now people can finally experience that with your book. And so this is an absolute treasure for Wells nerds and classic film fans. And people don't have to even be interested in film history. If they're just interested as classic movie fans or Wells fans, everybody's going to get something out of this. And the book is so wonderfully laid out and so clear and direct at telling people the journey from wanting to acquire the book, from the reader's reports to the original writers developing outlines, and Ben Hecht coming in and Ben Hecht leaving, and then getting to being a Mercury production, and then how it was done while Ambersons was still in production, and Wells in Brazil, and then the fallout and aftermath. Everything is so clear that somebody can pick up this book and understand everything and learn so much, and they don't necessarily have to be a fan of the film. It's so well done that anybody can get something out of this book.
Thank you so much. That really means the world to me, and I'm so grateful to you that you've allowed me to come onto your excellent show and talk about the book. And I'm grateful to anyone who's made it this far, who might check out the book, or we're just curious about what we're talking about. Thank you as well.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure, because when you said this, the subject of the book you were working on, I was like, wait, what? Because this has been one of my pet research projects, if you will, because I've always been fascinated by this film, and it was so unavailable for so long, and then finding out about the alternative version that only exists in low quality, but no one had ever gone into this film. And I've read everything I could get my hands on, but that wasn't much. And the rest, you're just having to speculate or play around with, okay, can I mash the two cuts together? And then you find out, well, no, I can't, because everything's different. How did it get this different? Where did this second cut come from? Did Wells actually work on some of the camera setups? How far was his involvement? where did this myth start that he directed the film? What happened to his writing credit? All of these and more are mysteries that are solved in Maverick and the Machine. That is, those are some of the many things you can find out if you've ever been curious about some of the things that surround this film. But the last point I want to make is that I was so grateful that you focused a great deal on debunking the, oh yeah, this Norman Foster guy didn't
Mm,
actually direct the movie. Because as a classic film fan, the more I've dug into things, the more I've become a fan of Foster's work. He was first an actor, he was a writer, he had traveled the world, he had a great background of experience, and he was a darn good director. And it
yes.
wasn't until I was an adult that I realized he had actually directed later in his career, when he was directing television episodes. He had directed, episodes of shows that were really important to me, and they weren't just, cranking out the usual assembly line stuff. He still did things to the high quality standard that had been, sort of drilled into him, making B films for the studios. I think, for, just for example, I think he made the best Zorro film ever made. If you consider his episodes of Disney Zorro series, particularly his episodes in the first arc that basically tells the classic Zorro story. He did, I think, 9 out of the 13 that comprise that arc. That altogether is the best Zorro film anybody's ever made. It's the best, most fully realized version of that. And it's got the amazing sword fights, and he even is credited with writing some of the iconic theme songs. So he even worked in writing music as well. So he was a journeyman. He had so many talents, but when you look at his actual resume, you realize this was somebody who knew what they were doing. This was somebody with a particular outlook, a great deal of experience, and an artistic signature of their own. When I tell people about the Mr. Moto films, I tell them straight up, you know, there are some that Foster didn't do, but the ones that Foster did, those are the work of an auteur. He actually wrote those films. So, I mean, if that's not an auteur, I don't know what is. But, every bit of those films have his stamp all over them. And the atmosphere, the intrigue, the fact that they're spy thrillers set in exotic locations, and there's some dashes of humor. I mean, there's a lot of the Mr. Moto films that he made in Journey into Fear. And I think if you look at those, you see Think Fast, Mr. Moto, you see just one of them, you're like, that's why Wells hired him, because he clearly knew what he was doing, and he was operating at a level that nobody else making B films was doing. So I that's why I was so happy you stressed how important Foster was to the film, and that he did actually direct it, and he contributed to the writing. He was an equal player, and that it wasn't just Wells standing behind the camera, or Wells doing everything, which also he couldn't have, because he was in Brazil. He was still making Ambersons. He was doing 10,000 things at once, which is not necessarily the best way to do things, as it turned out. But that for me was the most rewarding part of this book, seeing that, I guess you'd call it the Norman Foster vindication.
Good.
So I think this is just, it's a treasure of a book. It's something that I think every fan of Wells and the Mercury films, or people who love Citizen Kane but haven't really looked at Ambersons all that much. There's a greater world of Mercury at RKO. There were 3 films. It wasn't just Citizen Kane, and it wasn't just Kane and Ambersons. There's this other film that has a strange, fascinating history. And while the eventual film may not be, what it could have been, it's one of those compromised films that's unbelievably fascinating. So you find yourself constantly returning to it and thinking about it, and trying to learn more. And now we finally can. That's the amazing part. We have your fantastic book that I devoured. I couldn't stop reading it, because it was finally getting answers to questions I've had for years, basically ever since I first saw the film on, I guess it was a TCM broadcast. I think that's how I finally got to see it. And then I didn't get to see it again until I got the Laserdisc. And that was an experience because that had rot on it, and then that started my whole thing. And then I discovered the secondary cut on the Japanese laser disc, and then I been doing digging ever since.
I'm glad. I mean, that's what it was. I had this, like you, I had the same itch that I needed to scratch, and so I wrote the book.
Yeah, hey, at least you did something productive. You wrote a book. You know, not everybody can lay claim to. Well, I was wondering about it, so I wrote a whole book about it. And so you have done something productive with that itch being scratched, and also made such an invaluable resource for everybody moving forward.
Well, thank you. It really fills my heart just to hear that's really lovely. Thank you.
Oh, I'm going to review this book in a separate video and gush about it like crazy. I can't stop. I I really do think I've read most of your past books, and of course the Bond ones are just absolutely like I just I have it this close to my face because I'm just like, this is amazing. So many secrets, so many mysteries being solved. But I think this is probably your best book yet,
Oh wow.
because it is so, it's obviously focused on one film and one topic, but you've uncovered so much and told the entire history of this project from start to finish and the aftermath, and made it clear for people. That's the key, because this is a very confusing movie, and it's an extremely confusing story of how it got made and finished that we've never had in full before. So it's absolutely invaluable. So for anyone watching this who has gotten this far into our conversation, please go and check out Maverick in the Machine. It is it's just an invaluable work of film scholarship, and also it's one of the best books on Wells. Period. I mean, that's I think the best inducement right there.
I will I will say thank you for that. I have some wonderful well scholars whose work I love. Uh, uh, but that is a lovely thing to say.
Your book is right there next to them, as I'm the same way. I've got all the great Wells books on my shelf. I've even got the ones that I don't quite agree with, but of course, as a completist and Wells nerd, I hang on to those too, and I still reread them occasionally. So there are the tried and true ones, but that's why I compare this to Carringer's books on Kane and Ambersons, because this is really that third volume we've always needed. It's focusing entirely on the film that's been locked away and kept in the attic, the distant stepchild that nobody likes to talk or think about, or if they do reference it, it's usually in some offhand manner, or oh yeah, that Journey into Fear, yeah, that little film they made, it's only 68 minutes. Yeah, it's a little B movie.
Yeah, no, I hope that this book gives people an opportunity to to discover the film and reevaluate it, and reevaluate Wells's place in it, as well as Norman Foster's.
Yeah, I hope it does that, and I hope it encourages people to actually go and see the film, which, for those who aren't aware, there is now a lovely Warner Archive Blu-ray. It is unfortunately bare bones. I mean, it has some of the Mercury Theater radio shows, but none of them related to the film. But we finally have a high-resolution scan of the release version from the best preservation elements, and while the transfer does show the sort of patchwork nature of the film that's inherent, it is frequently stunning. So definitely go and pick up a copy of that, and then also dive into Mark's incredible book. So I guess we'll close there. I just want to say, Mark, thanks so much for coming on and talking about your book, and thank you for such an incredible book. Again, I devoured reading this. You have answered so many of my long-held nerdy questions that I thought would just never get answered.
Yeah, I mean, it's like with this was sort of my WellsNet has a message board where people talk about Wells' work and ask tons of questions and speculate and research. They're very, 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 very knowledgeable at WellsNet. And this was sort of my message board post in book form.
Ah, yeah. You spared the multi-page post and instead
Yes.
to put it in book form. Yeah, that's great. So is there so the book is coming out in a softcover and hardcover form. I guess where's the best place for people to look at getting a
That's a
copy?
good question. I think Amazon is the best place. It'll eventually roll out to other places, but I think the most reliable source is Amazon.
Okay, and I'll have links in the description below to everything and to your social media and such. Is there anything you're working on next, or anything you'd like to plug? Anything in the pipeline?
I have uh, I'm working on a Wells radio book.
That's
I
why I
wrote,
asked that question because
I
at
was
the end I saw the mention of that, and that Wells's radio career is near and dear to my heart because I'm also a golden age radio geek, and I saw that and my eyes immediately lit up.
so that I wrote that and this in tandem, in
Mhm.
parallel. So we will, that's coming later.
Okay. Oh, that's a wonderful tease for the upcoming book as a lovely companion piece to this. So I just want to say, Mark, thank you so much for coming on and talking with me about this film we both love, even though we're probably two of the only people who love studying it this deeply, or admittedly two of the only people who actually know the film or have seen it because
Well,
it's
I
been
hope
so
that's not the
obscure.
case. I hope there's one or two people out
Yeah,
there who are at least
I think
curious.
it's gotten better, especially since the Blu-ray came out. That
Yeah.
that has helped immensely. So that's why I've got it prominently here, and hopefully people will get a copy if they haven't seen the film, so then they can dive into your incredible book. But as always, it is lovely to chat with you, Mark, and thanks so much for another invaluable book of film scholarship. And I can't wait to see and experience your Wells radio book that's coming up, and maybe we can have another chat for that as well.
Oh, I'd love that. Thank you, Spencer. And thank you, everyone who watched.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for watching. Again, definitely go and pick up a copy of Mark's book. I'll have links in the description below where you can pick it up, and also maybe check out some of his other incredible books. But until next time, I just want to say, as always, thank you ever so much for watching.